My name is Muhammad Dini Ajwad bin Muhammad Sabri and my metric number is 275634. Background of the study. Tourism is the largest contributor of income to the whole country, especially in our country, Malaysia. Tourism is defined as the activity of traveling, visiting, or traveling from one location to another that is more than 50 miles from one's residence and lasts no more than 1 year. Essentially, it refers to any activity involving the short-term movement of people to locations other than their usual residence. It is one of the largest industries in the world, as well as the economies of many nation-states are highly dependent on tourism. Tourism is a rapidly expanding sector with far-reaching financial and ecological consequences around the world. Minister of Tourism, Arts and Culture said that the country's tourism sector is on the best track. Malaysia has managed to set a record as one of the 10 countries with the world's best tourism destination for the year 2018. The researcher Badaruddin Mohammed and Yusmita Yusuf has stated that tourism industry in Malaysia has been traditionally concentrated and promoted towards international markets since its infancy stage in year 1960. Until today, the tourism sector in Malaysia has grown tremendously and has been ranked the second largest foreign income after manufacturing in 2000 and its subsequent years. Malaysia has its uniques that is able to attract tourists to travel. The tourism industry in the country has become the sixth largest source of economic growth with a total contribution of 161 billion ringgit Malaysia or 14.9% based on gross domestic product GDP in 2014. Weaver and Opperman have highlighted that the number of domestic tourists taking vacation is massive compared to international tourists in most countries and even global scale. Domestic tourism has a positive impact on the national country. While the world is hit by the COVID-19 epidemic, people are unable to travel abroad and they have chosen to travel within the country with their families. The government is a party directly involved in operating the tourism industry and improving the economy. Problem statement. The tourism has grown rapidly in Malaysia, where many government agencies and tourism entities are taking steps to create a bright opportunity for the tourism industry. Tourism has been the lifeblood of several countries' economies since time immemorial. Domestic tourism is very important because it is managed by Malaysians. Malaysians spend money travel within the country, particularly during school holidays, festivals, and celebrations. The government has used various means to attract tourists to continue to traveling within the country, for example, giving high funds to the tourism industry. Over the past decade, Malaysia's tourism has benefited from rapidly expanding domestic receipts, hence contributed to the country's economy and prolongs to increase in the incoming years. Until now, Malaysia had introduced policies towards the tourism industry aimed at meeting the current economic challenges. This is because the policy contributes to the improvement of the country's economy. For example, Malaysia has reopened the tourism industry even in the face of the COVID-19 epidemic. This is because the tourism industry, especially domestic tourism, is able to have a positive impact in generating income for the country and local people. Therefore, this research is executed to investigate the impact of domestic tourism on economic growth in Malaysia and to study the elements that affect Malaysians to travel domestically or internally rather than travelling abroad, of which will further contribute to the country's revenue. Research question: what does domestic tourism impact economic growth in Malaysia? What is the sources of domestic tourism for economic growth in Malaysia? Objective of the study: to identify what are the impact of domestic tourism on economic growth in Malaysia. To identify the sources of domestic tourism for economic growth in Malaysia. The scope of the study: this study is taken through a 30-month observation from 2008 to 2019 on domestic tourism on economic growth in Malaysia.
Assalamualaikum and hi, my name is Nurshafika binti Nilkasi, matrix number 275806. I will present about the analysis and discussion. The diagram below shows the table of the descriptive analysis of all the variables. There are 5 scatter plots graph where it shows the linear relationship between the dependent variable and the independent variables. Based on the data we studied, our dependent variable is the domestic tourism expenditure (DTE), and there are 5 independent variables which are domestic tourism visitors (DTV), domestic off-trips (DOT), employment domestic tourism (EDT), gross value added of tourism industries (GVATI), and the tourism direct gross domestic product (DDGDP). Based on the scatter plot, it's shown that the relationship between DTE and all the independent variables are positive linear relationship. First, we start with correlation analysis. We use correlation analysis to identify the relationship between the variables. The coefficient correlation formula is as shown in the slides, and the result values must be in the range of -1 and 1. The correlation of our studies is positive, where the relationship between the variables are positive as shown in the correlation analysis table below. We can conclude that the relationship between the variables is positive, where it lies under the range of -1 and 1. Next, we study the specific multiple regression model. It is to estimate the equation of the sample regression model on the DTE, which is the dependent variable, and the independent variables. This is the table of the descriptive statistic of the dependent variable DTE. Next, we estimate the sample regression model function using the beta naught and beta 1. So our sample regression model is DTE equal to -11.73 minus 0.07 DTV plus 0.25 DOT plus 2.11 EDT plus 0.18 GVATI minus 0.002 TDGDP. So we can conclude that beta naught is on the average. If all the independent variables are 0, then the predicted DTE is decreases by 11.73 unit. For the beta 1, on the average holding the DOT and EDT constant, if the DTV decreases by 1 unit, then the DTE will decrease by 0.074 unit. Next, for beta 2, on the average holding DTV and EDT constant, if the DOT increases by 1 unit, then the DTE increases by 0.25 unit. For the beta 3, on the average holding GVATI and the TDGDP constant, if the EDT increases by 1 unit, then the DTE increases by 2.11 unit. Next, for the beta 4, on the average holding EDT and TDGDP constant, if the GVATI increases by 1 unit, then the DTE increase by 0.18 unit. Lastly, for beta 5, on the average holding EDT and GVATI constant, If the TD-GDP decreases by 1 unit, then the DTE decreases by 0.002 unit. After that, we proceed with the coefficient determination R-squares to ensure the goodness fit. So we measure the proportion of variation in Y explained by axis within the equation model. R square equal to SSR per SST, we can simplify as 1 minus SSE per SST. And measure the adjusted R square using the formula of adjusted R square equal to 1 minus SE of regression per SD dependent variable. Based on the table above, we compute that SSE equal to 19.108 and SST is 23.991. So we use the previous formula and the result of R square is 0.9992 and the variation in DT of R square value is 99.92%. So for the adjusted R squares is equal to 0.9991, then the variation in DTE of the adjusted R square is 99.91%. After that, we compute the normality test to test the residuals of the fitted model and detect problems in the models. So we use the histogram of residuals method to identify whether the residuals are normally distributed or not. Based on the histogram graph below, the resulted histogram skewness and the kurtosis is 0.2417 and 1.8040. Next is the autocorrelation problem. We use the Lagrange multiplier principle to detect the autocorrelation problems. The hypothesis for the LM test H null is the arrow are not serially correlated, and for the alternative hypothesis, the arrows are related in one of the two possible ways on AR and MR. So this is the AR1 error on the least square estimates equation based on our variables, which is DTE equal to beta naught plus beta 1 DTV plus beta 2 DOT plus beta 3 EDT plus beta 4 GVATI plus beta 5 TDGDP plus least square arrow plus VT. And for the error terms, Y1 plus Y2 DTV plus Y3 DOT plus Y4 EDT plus Y5 GVATI plus Y6 TDGDP plus least square arrow plus VT. Lastly, based on the Lagrange multiplier test table, the value of f is 320.564 and the LM equal to x square is 40.23. So the value of f amount is a test of the significance of the least square, the coefficient of residual -1. So the value of LM can be calculated by observation multiply R square, so we can get 40.23. Hence, the p-value of t-test and f-test are 0.000. So the null hypothesis of this study is p equal to 0. So we can conclude that there is no autocorrelation is rejected at 5% significance level. Next, I will pass to the next presenter to talk about the heteroscedasticity.
Assalamualaikum. My name is Nur Adilah binti Ramli and my metric number is 275315. Now I will present about the next methods of analysis, which is heteroscedasticity. We detect the heteroscedasticity using the Bruch-Pagan test and also known in the Lagrange multiplier test. The table shows the results of the Bruch-Pagan test. The value of the chi-square statistic is 13.0719 and the f value is 3.1935, which are less than the critical values. The corresponding p-value are 0.0164 and 0.0227 respectively, smaller than 0.05. So we reject the null hypothesis of homoscedasticity at a 5% significant level. The test is statistically significant where the error term is heteroscedastic. We conclude that the model is heteroscedastic. Now, the next method of analysis, which is multicollinearity. We will conduct the multicollinearity test after the model significance and all significance IV had been determined. Based on the study, the R square is 0.999. Meanwhile, the F test is 10329.99 and the T tests are statistically significant as shown in the table. Based on the data, we can conclude that it is under the height R square but few significant T ratio. It is because the R square is high, which excess of 0.8 is statistically significant, and all the T tests are also statistically significant. It seems there is no multicollinearity problem. Besides that, we detect the multicollinearity using the tolerance and variance inflection factor. If the variance inflection factors of a variable exceed 10, where usually the R square will exceed at 0.90, then the variable is highly collinear. The table shows the variance inflection factor. So, based on that table, we can compute that study of the variables is highly collinear, whereas the variables inflection factors of variables exceed 10, which is variables inflection factor more than 10. From the result and discussions of the data that we obtained, which is total expenditure for domestic tourism in Malaysia from 2008 to 2019. The diagram shows the trends of graph movement increase. This is because the government has issued expenditure from the tourism sector because it is believed that the tourism sector is a sector that can provide improvement to the nation's economy. The lowest expenditure was in 2008, which was Rm 17.9 billion, and the highest expenditure was in 2019, which was Rm 103.2 billion. Following the COVID-19 pandemic, the tourism industry had to be shut down in order to maintain national security and safety. However, the government has taken a number of steps and issues policy capable of reviving the tourism industry. For example, the government has re-allowed domestic tourism, which means that tourism can only travel within the country, so that the tourism industry continues to generate income for the country. For the conclusion, the result of the study found that the tourism sectors contribute the highest to the tourism sector itself. This is because, as discussed, the tourism industry is an industry that has various subsectors to meet the needs of diverse tourists. Meanwhile, from the results of comparative analysis from year to year, it is found that domestic tourism play an important role in the entire tourism industry of the country, although the contributions of income generated is not as much the income received from foreign tourism. Various effort needs to be made to highlight the unique offering in each domestic destination. Effort can be done to promote domestic tourism to attract local to explore the specialties of Malaysia. Therefore, the government should give priority to the tourism sector as it has the potentials to be the main driver of Malaysia's economic growth. So, that's all from us. Thank you.
I'm an icon, man. And my girl about a 10. I should fuck her in the Benz.